तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिर्परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत्। Namaste. So today's topic that we will discuss is aspiration. A very special and a very basic from the point of view of the path of integral yoga by Sri Aurobindo. And we really need to understand of how this all comes into play and why aspiration is so important when we talk or when we discuss about the path of integral yoga. Right? So today we'll go through some of the passages and writings from Sri Aurobindo's letters, where he has discussed in detail about what aspiration is, why it is important, how does it really come into play, and what role does that play in our journey of this integral yoga. Right? So before talking about aspiration, a very important reminder for all of us, as Sri Aurobindo has said, that all life is yoga. Our entire life is a spiritual journey. Every one of us, every human being is on this path of a spiritual enlightenment. And what makes integral yoga so special, and what makes it very different from the other yoga that we see, the path of yoga, what Sri Aurobindo has mentioned, two very important words that really form the basis is transition and transformation. So transition from the ignorant consciousness to a higher level of consciousness, and ultimately transforming this consciousness on this earthly matter, right? The divine consciousness. How do we really transform the current physical state into that divine state? So this is a very beautiful connection that Sri Aurobindo has elaborated in the path of integral yoga. So in order to understand this path and how we should be on this integral yoga, there are certain prerequisites, right? So we see, for a doctor has to understand the biology, an engineer has to understand the basics of mathematics. Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga also has very clear-cut prerequisites. Yeah? So what are those? That is where the story of aspiration comes. That is one of the basic conditions, if you can say, and that's what he elaborates in the letters of yoga. This is section 2, chapter 5. Where he says that what you say is quite true. A simple, straight and sincere call and aspiration from the heart is the one important thing and more essential and effective than capacities. Yeah, so every human being has a different potential, a different capacity with which we are all existing. But when it comes to the aspiration, that is a soul determining factor of, having chosen this path of integral yoga. That aspiration has to be really, really strong, and that is something, a very basic condition for this path. Yeah? The help you ask will be with you. Let the aspiration grow and open the inner consciousness altogether. It's very profound, he said, where it's all about going inwards and making that inward consciousness more alive, and that is something which is connecting you to your aspiration. So aspiration is, he's put it very simply, like one has to only aspire very sincerely, to keep oneself as open as possible to mother's forces. So very beautifully is kind of then whatever difficulties come, they will overcome. It may take some time, but the result is sure. Yeah? So patience is very, very important. But the first step is aspiration. Calling the mother's grace. The divine gives the fruits not by the measure of the sadhana, but by the measure of the soul and its aspiration. So it's aspiration which really, really matters. Yeah? We tend to attach a lot of outcomes, or we say, we will pray for such and such time, we will meditate for 30 minutes, we'll meditate for 2 hours. That is fine. That is all a kind of, a practice in this path. But what truly matters is your level of aspiration within. That is what is needed for that transcendental journey. So what does aspiration really mean? And that also Sri Aurobindo explains in his letters when writing to sadhaks. So it is the call in the being for the divine or for the higher things that belong to the divine consciousness. To aspire always means to call for higher things. It's your sincere craving for that divine bliss, for the divine force, for the divine power. Aspiration is a turning upward of the inner being with a call, with a yearning, with a prayer for the divine, for the consciousness, peace, ananda, knowledge, descent of divine force. So aspiration is that yearning to have that divine consciousness right here. And it's very also interesting that he has also put in a context of the Shakti, aspiration to call the Shakti. Aspiration to call the forces. When the forces have answered, there's a natural state of quiet receptivity, concentrated but spontaneous. So this is the kind of the basic condition that going into a path of integral yoga, first that ground is set. You have that inner calling, and like Mother has emphasized it very prominently, that aspiration is a very clear movement of your psychic being. Yeah, aspiration is nothing to do with your physical, vital, mental planes. It is a pure play of your psychic movement, and that is how you can distinguish between when you aspire or when you desire. So that is also, the differentiation has also been given very clearly, that we should not confuse aspiration with our own desire, that I am doing this to achieve something. Yeah, and it's beyond those definitions of having to achieve something at a physical level, at a mental level, or a vital level, which is very much very materialistic in nature. Aspiration is always very pure. It is something to do direct with the divine. The Wi-Fi connection has to be absolute clear. There are no interim in-betweens. Yeah, so whenever you connect, that connection has to be really strong. That is the core aspiration of how you are connecting directly with the divine. So there's a passage in the letters where he says it very clearly, that there is no doubt the mixture of desire in what you do, even in your endeavor of sadhana. Many a times it also happens, like the process of being in sadhana or in this yogic journey, it's a very natural tendency to expect some outcome. Yeah, we generally tend to have that attachment somewhere, because ultimately, and he acknowledges, and he kind of writes it very openly, that it is a very difficult path. Yeah, the desire brings a movement of impatient effort and a reaction of disappointment and revolt when difficulty is felt and the immediate result is not there. So it carries a lot of confusion and disappointment, that I'm doing this, but it's not happening. Something, we always try to attach it with some sort of an outcome, which is what he is clearly mentioning, that it is very separate from desire. Do not confuse aspiration with desire. Yeah? Aspiration should not be a form of desire, but the feeling of an inner soul's need and a quiet, settled will to turn towards the divine and seek the divine. It is certainly not easy to get rid of this mixture. He's a very soft and patient teacher. He knows everything. What will be the difficulties? He clearly says that it is not easy. But we should be realizing the distinction of where it is, how to really kind of understand the essence of aspiration. So intense aspiration is always good, but let there also be calm and peace and joy in the mind and heart, and a confidence that all will be done in its due time. So we always get to know that phrase of thy will be done, not mine. Yeah? So having that calmness in our hearts, that peace, that it will be the divine's will, which will, everything will be in order. That faith, that surrender in the divine, that is of very crucial importance. So these are the two things, like we discussed, of the conditions when we are in the yogic path. So we always need to be cognizant of another two parameters which are very, very important in this path. One is, like we just spoke about, the surrender. The first thing is complete surrender with sincerity. That's the first thing which is very important for the path of integral yoga. And the second is, which he has mentioned again and again, is the fundamental calm and peace. So two things you have to always keep in mind: surrender and be calm. Yeah? One can aspire for the divine to bring about the supramental transformation, but that also should not be done till being has become psychic and spiritualized by the descent of Mother's peace, force, light and purity. So it's all connected. So we are aspiring for the divine power to transcend. But at the same time, we also need to prepare ourselves to receive that grace. Yeah, so it all goes hand in hand. So there is no need of words in aspiration. It can be expressed or unexpressed in words. The aspiration need not be in the form of thought. It can be a feeling within that remains even when the mind is attending to the work. So even while we are doing our day-to-day activities, we are in our work, but that constant feeling of just being connected to that higher divine form, aspiring, yeah, that is what is the quintessential basis. So he says, what's the necessity of aspiration? It may not come exactly according to the aspiration, but the aspiration is not ineffective. So there have been some times, and that's what Sri Aurobindo mentions, that there are phases when you would feel, and even the sadhaks have discussed this with him, that there are phases when, let's say it's a very inactive state, you don't feel that connection. So sometimes they get, am I doing it right? Am I on the right track? Is it all okay? So these are all natural things that will happen, because whenever you speak about aspiration, the two other components that are discussed usually together is aspiration, rejection and surrender. These are the three pillars, so to say, which is generally talked very coherently. So there's a very interesting conversation that happened between Nirodha and Sri Aurobindo. So Nirodha asked him that, what if the rejection and the surrender is not okay? What if these two things are not proper? Is my aspiration, will it still be applicable? So Sri Aurobindo says, absolutely. Aspiration is the basis. Once you are aspiring in the most sincere way, if your aspiration is sorted, rejection and surrender will automatically follow. Your aspiration has to be the basis of everything. So it's a very beautiful connection. So it's all, if you look at the larger picture, it's all connecting the dots. So at the center, at the core of it, you have the aspiration with a very calm sense and that sense of equanimity, because that is what you are preparing yourself for that path. And rejection and surrender is bound to happen. Yeah, it would come. So there's also this sort of placing this aspiration that what should we aspire for? How should we aspire? So aspiration is also connected to like there is from mother's conversations, what you must aspire for is peace in all being, complete equanimity. So peace, purity, equanimity, once it is established, all the rest is mother's free gift. So that's where you are preparing yourself. So first, why preparing yourself? You have to make everything be ready for that grace. Start with that peace, equanimity. Once you have that in place, rest is all mother's grace that will eventually come to you. Yeah. So the more that we think about our spiritual experiences, or how intense an experience can go, it is very much directly linked on how intense your aspiration power is. I mean, it's very closely tied. And also there is a component of the will, that is the self-will that is working towards aspiration. Aspiration doesn't come just like that. You have to work towards it, and that's what mother keeps emphasizing, that you have to develop that will. Yeah, there are some who are really blessed from since the time of the birth, they have that sense of aspiration. For some, it is, we have to develop that within ourselves, and that is pure will. So that willingness has to be there. So that's what Sri Aurobindo says, that when he talks about the call and the capacity of an individual to come into this path of yoga, it's not even a function of capacity anymore. The first thing that you should be in that state of willingness, that yes, you will be on that path and you are ready to prepare yourself for that path. So willingness also comes into picture when you talk about aspiration. Activity in aspiration, tapasya, rejection of the wrong forces, the working of mother's force are the right things in sadhana. So he gives this very gems to keep in mind, and how we have to aspire and how we need to surrender for that grace to act upon. Yeah. So the duality and the distinction that we spoke about, aspiration and the concept of desire, how they are very different, and how we should not be confusing and mixing it with what we intend to do. So that's another way of interpreting that aspiration will always be very quiet within. It will always bring a lot of sense of harmony within the inner being, while the desire will always be a sense of creating some turbulent atmosphere in your physical, mental, vital states of being. So that's a very clear-cut distinction that we see. So the intensity of aspiration brings the intensity of the experience, and by repeated intensity, the experience of change. The impatience and restless disquietude come from the vital, which brings that even into the aspiration. And that's where he says that the aspiration must be intense, calm and strong. That is the nature of the true vital also, and not restless and impatient. Only then it can be stable. So that's very clear. So he has defined aspiration with so many different angles of what you can understand and what does it really mean for us when we actually need to practice or prepare ourselves for this path. So when we are aiming for aspiration, there are basically three things that he has enlisted, or where we should try to focus on. The first is the full descent of the truth, and victory over falsehood. This is sort of, when you say that aspiring for what? The aim of aspiration. So full descent of the truth and victory over falsehood. The second is peace in all being, which is complete equanimity. And the third is the psychic change and spiritual change of the whole being. So it's also interconnected with the way that we are working within ourselves. So aspiration, something is, we are seeing it from which is connecting us to the outer side, the external side. But aspiration is also the inward journey, where we are trying to work upon our own psychic being and working on that. Because ultimately your aspiration is, like we just discussed, right? It's a movement of the psychic being eventually, because it's above the mental, vital and physical planes, and true aspiration always comes from your inner calling, the inner psychic being. So that's kind of the North Star for us in terms of understanding the basics. There's a very beautiful passage by the mother. So I'll just read through this. This is very kind of nicely summarized when it talks about, preparing for the path. So one doesn't have the impression that when he's born, he begins to set his feet on a road which is going to lead him by a curve through his whole life. That's the image. So if you take the path which must lead you to a spiritual realization, it means that all your actions are naturally, deliberately going to be directed to this goal. So it's very beautifully kind of setting the tone that at first, the moment you're born, you don't know which path to go, where, how it will lead. You don't know the complete story yet. You will first learn to walk. First, you will learn to stabilize yourself. A toddler, he first needs to learn to how to set his feet on the ground. Then he will know how to balance himself, stabilize himself. Then he will understand the path. And then he will realize that, okay, where I am supposed to go. So it's a beautiful journey of understanding the different milestones, and the same applies to us in our spiritual journey. The day we are born, we don't know that what is our spiritual goal or a spiritual path. But first we need to at least put our feet on the ground. So that's why she said this very nicely. And so Sri Aurobindo says that there is a bit of the way it is under control. So once you are on that way, so there are certain set of reasons, and if you follow that, it will help you to go forward without making mistakes too often. So when we are on a certain path in our day-to-day lives also, we are bound to make mistakes. We learn from our mistakes, and that's how we evolve. We are not kind of the perfect beings right from the start. We all make mistakes, and it's a part of our life journey where we don't know stuff, we do things, we fall down, again we get up, So usually the general tendency is that people enter life without even knowing what it is to live. And at each step, they have to learn how to live. And before knowing what they want to realize, they must at least know how to walk. Yeah. As we teach a tiny little child how to walk in life, one has also to learn how to live. And it is through these experiences, through the mistakes, through the all kinds of troubles and misfortunes we all go through. Yeah, every sort of that, it gradually it begins. Then we try to understand our situations in form of some reasonings. Oh, that is the reason this happened. It always happens when we think about it retrospectively. We don't think about it while it is happening to us. Yeah, we go through a lot of experiences, but only after a certain point of time, after it has happened, after we've gone through, then it kind of strikes, oh, this is the reason why this happened. Yeah. And that's the kind of the reasoning pattern that we form in our minds. And then we also realize that, okay, if I did some mistake, then I don't have to repeat that. So that's a learning process that I go through. But there is a moment when the brain is developed enough and you can see the reason, and the reason will help you to reduce the number of mistakes, because now you have learned, you have already been on that path. And without stumbling too often. Yeah, now you will not fall so quickly. So it's a very interesting way of putting things into perspective, that majority of the human beings are born, living, then they die without knowing why this has happened to them. But there are also some people whom they try to know what has happened to them, why they are on earth, what is the purpose. Yeah, they try to understand the reason. Then there are some who use their reason and they find a way of walking properly on the path. So there are some people who have set the foot on the ground, they're repeatedly falling, okay, they don't care much. But there are some set of people who will start walking and they will make sure that they walk properly. Yeah, so they will be more conscious about how they are walking. Yeah, and then there will be another set, or you can say another segment of how we can analyze this, is someone who will now try to explore, okay, what is the destination. So he will go further ahead in that journey to explore the path. Now that he has stabilized himself, now he wants to explore, okay, what is there, and what the seeking capability or the capacity that comes into picture. Yeah. And then there are some, like how we are seeing the evolution happening, there are some who are almost immediately ready to set themselves out on the adventure. Like the moment they put their feet on the ground, they are on adventure. Now I will go and explore. So then there is, mother says that there is a risk, because they have to be really, really very strong with their inner conscious. Yeah, otherwise there is bound to be obstacles or hurdles. Oh, this happened, why did this happen? This happened to me, I don't know why this happened to me, I don't know why I took this road, but still I fell down, why did I do that? So there are a lot of questions and there are a lot of obstacles which will come. So that's what she mentions, that as long as it is like that, the path is somewhat dangerous. Only when one does what he wants, knows what he wants, does what he wants, he is able to direct himself with certitude without being tossed by the hazards of life. So that's where it all connects to being with that conscious force. that once you set your feet on the ground, you are conscious, you know what you are doing, how you have to do it, and you take that thing with certitude. And these days it's also very interesting, and we see like very young kids, they are very much I would say awakened. They talk so talk about different stories. They are like, I'm amazed to see some of the podcasts with some really young children, like they must be 8 to 10 years old, and they're talking about mythology and spirituality and all this sorts of big philosophical jargons. I mean, I'm surprised hearing them, but there's always some sort of what's also interesting to observe is that how collected they are. So some of those children, they're very, we may think that kids are irresponsible, they do not know how to but some of them are like, really, when they are in that kind of zone of talking such big things, they are also very composed, and you can see that in their behavior patterns and everything. So it's a kind of another example that we are seeing as the days are passing by. So different wave of consciousness, how conscious even those toddlers are, in terms of engaging, in terms of communicating, in terms of just being. Yeah. One can begin very young, and that's what mother says, that even a child of 5 can already make use of reason to control himself. This is very, very interesting. So it's all about how we are seeing the entire cycle of things, of being conscious, of being in control of oneself, of the mind. Yeah, how we are connected, how we are going more into that inward journey. And at the end of the day, it's all about how willing we are to go more and more into our psychic development. At the end of the day, it comes to that phase. So there's in section 2 of Letters of Yoga, that is the basic requisites of the path, where the topic of aspiration has been explained. Just taking a step back, because it is also connected to the call and the capacity which Sri Aurobindo emphasizes on. So when he talks about the call, this yoga is a special way to a high and difficult spiritual achievement. It is given only when there is sufficient evidence of capacity or an irresistible call. Inner peace is not its object. That is only one of the elementary conditions for it. So now here he talks about it in, which is much more detailed, that this yoga implies not only the realization of God, but an entire consecration and change of the inner and outer life till it fits to manifest a divine consciousness and become part of a divine work. So that is what he elaborates on the integral yoga piece of, you are not stopping just at the realization of God, but it's also transforming the matter into the divine. Yeah. By readiness to enter the path, I do not mean the capacity, but willingness. If there is the will within to face all difficulties and go through, no matter how long it takes, then the path can be taken. So a lot of perseverance, the patience, everything comes hand in hand, where it is emphasized very much. A mere restless dissatisfaction with the ordinary life is not a sufficient preparation for this yoga. There has to be a positive inner call, a strong will, a great steadiness for the success in spiritual life. So there's a lot of discussion about there was an interview with Dr. Dalal where this question was also kind of posed, and in fact it was the first question that was posed to him, that this entire path of yoga, of transition of the lower ignorant consciousness to the higher consciousness, this is inevitable process, right? This will happen in any which way. It is bound to happen. It's not something that it is only reserved for few people, that they will be on the path and this transition and transformation will happen. It is bound to happen across. So the question that was there then, if it is anyways a generic process, then why should we do the yoga? Yeah, why is this path what's the need for doing the yoga? Any which way the transition will happen, the transformation will happen, right? So then Dr. Dalal says, it was so beautiful to listen to him. He says that it is the call that makes all the difference. It is the call from the psychic which makes all the difference and which actually brings you to this path of integral yoga. So until and unless the psychic being trigger is there, which is defined by the purity of the call, which is beyond any sort of, I will do this, so I will get this, I will do 5 pranayams today, I will do 30-minute meditation today, I will do all sorts of my routine, regular practice. But the purity and the sincerity of the call, of knowing the meaning behind doing all of this, that becomes very, very important. So and that's why when we start reading about the basic requisites and realize that the call and the capacity is so important to first understand, like even before coming into the path of integral yoga, the calling is so much of importance that it has to be a very pure play of your heart and not just guided by some sort of mental construct that, I'm not liking this, let me do some yoga, let me sit. But that might help you to get to that path, but to be on that path, it's a different perspective to look at. So that's why he says, turning towards the divine. An idealistic notion or a religious belief or emotion is something quite different from getting the spiritual light. An idealistic notion might turn you towards getting the spiritual light, but it is not the light itself. Very profound. If we just think through and read between the lines, it's something beyond that. So getting or turning towards the divine, and this gets into another level of actually bringing the divine into your own being and transforming yourself. The push to drown oneself in the divine is very rare. It is usually a mental idea and some quite inadequate reason that starts the thing. The only reality is that there is a psychic push behind of which the surface consciousness is not aware. So essentially talking about that thrust, that push from the psychic being that's actually making the journey start. So the topic of spiritual destiny. So when someone is destined for the path, all circumstances through all the deviations of mind and life help in one way or the other to lead him into it. So there is always a component of spiritual destiny as well. It is his own psychic being within him and the divine power above that use to that end the vicissitudes both of mind and outward circumstance. The spiritual destiny always stands. It may be delayed or seem to be lost for a time, but it is never abolished. It is always there. The spiritual destiny is always there. And it's all a matter of time. It's all when we open up. Like we read also that the grace is always there. It's upon us. How much are we open? How much are we calling the divine force, Mother's grace? The grace is always there. So the calling and the preparation has to go simultaneously. You're calling for the divine grace, and parallelly you are preparing yourself how? Through the path of equanimity, calm, peace, faith, surrender. So these are some essential qualities that we have to have. So the capacity of yoga, all can do some kind of yoga according to their nature if they have the will to it. But there are a few of whom it can be said that they have capacity for this yoga. In sadhana, it is not by the personal capacity that things are done. It is the divine power that works. And if one makes oneself its instrument, even what is impossible for the personal capacity can be done. So that's where the component of how to really be above all the vital desires of that egoistic tendencies that, oh, I'm doing this. Yeah, I'm kind of on this yogic path and this is my personal capacity. But ultimately it is the divine power which is working through you. It's just that you have to constantly keep making that effort. Keep your aspiration always as the baseline and continue your efforts, and definitely the destination will be reached. So it's not that you are driving the car, it's the divine force. You just have to, be which road the divine will take, that is the divine will. I cannot say that I have to reach airport only through the ORR. There must be some other route. So, but the aspiration has to be absolutely sure shot and pure play. When one once enters into true yogic consciousness, then you see that everything can be done, even if at present only a slight beginning has been made, but a beginning is enough. Once the force, the power are there. It is not really on the capacity of the outer nature that success depends, but on the inner being, and to the inner being all is possible. So the emphasis has always been on the inner work, how we are delving more into our trying to open up our psychic being, because that's sitting somewhere right, very quiet, not shouting, very plain. But we have to nurture that. We have to kind of bring that child or that psychic nature out, and that is which will guide you and which has that trigger for a true aspiration. Yeah? And that's why the mother says that it's all a movement of the psychic. That's all that matters. Spiritual capacity means simply a natural capacity for true spiritual experience and development. It can be had on any plane, but the natural result is that one gets easily into touch with the self and higher planes. So that's what he elaborates with the conditions of yoga, that he says that I have never said that this yoga was a safe one. No yoga is. Each has its dangers as every attempt in human life, but it can be carried through if one has a central sincerity and fidelity to the divine. The first condition, like I said, sincerity and surrender, and the fundamental calm and peace. So these are the two. The hours of meditation should be devoted to the formation of these two conditions, by aspiration and by self-observations. Yeah, so this is, he also kind of enlists the kind of what should be your temperament while you are meditating. Yeah, what has to be there. As the hours devoted to work, needs, family, etc., even there's a particular perspective that he also enumerates, that to regard all these things as not belonging to yourself, your inner being, but as things external. So work has to be done as long as it remains on your shoulder to the best of your ability, without desire or attachment of any kind. So even when we are in our day-to-day work, what's the perspective to have? To do all the work as a sacrifice without any egoistic motive, and to establish and deepen the inner calm and quiet. So if that all is done, then these things will be felt more and more as external, and falling of the desire and attachment will become more possible. So with everything that we are kind of in our work, or any which way, I mean, if we have that kind of a perspective, so things become more easier when we have that sense of little detachment, that we are working it from the divine lens, for the divine, working for the divine. If you separate yourself from these movements and establish calm and peace inside, the passions may still rise on the surface, but they will be felt to be external movements, and you can deal with them. So the further method is to concentrate in the heart and aspire, to call to the Divine Mother to enter there and purify the mind and vital, and unveil the psychic being. And to concentrate in the quiet mind, open oneself to the divine force and light. Yoga must be done not for oneself or what one can get, but for the sake of divine and to be united with the divine. That's a very clear-cut statement. Clean, simple. Yeah? What does it really mean? So these are the qualities needed for sadhana, and as we all learn the basics, right? A, B, C. So A for aspiration. That's the first very basic step that we have to understand in the vocabulary of sadhana, of this yoga. So aspiration is something which, without aspiration, nothing is it's all meaningless. I think these were the pearls of wisdom from the letters of yoga, what we had from aspiration. And I would like to end it with a passage. Evidently, the activities and aspirations of men are not trivial and worthless, for all life is a growth of the soul out of the darkness towards the light. But our attitude is that humanity cannot grow out of its limitations by the ordinary means adopted by the human mind, politics, social reform, philanthropy, etc. These can only be temporary or local palliatives. The only true escape is a change of consciousness, a change into a greater, wider, purer way of being, and a life and action based on that change. It is therefore to that the energies must be turned once the spiritual orientation is complete. This implies no contempt, but the preference of the only effective means over those which have been found ineffective. So, very important part, that the change of consciousness is something very, very integral. And that all will help us to grow from the darkness towards the light. And we all pray we must keep our aspiration alive so that this path always be upwards, and may this light prevail, and may we have divine peace and that force on our earthly plane. So we can do a short chant and we'll end the session. Yeah? सत्यमयी